Dr. Sarah Chen had seen many strange things during her 5 years working at the Galactic Trade Station, orbiting Kepler 442b, but nothing quite like the scene unfolding in the lower cargo bay. The massive Zephyrian female stood nearly 8 feet tall, her 6 arms wrapped protectively around 3 small children who barely reached her waist. Her blue-scaled skin had lost its natural shimmer, dulled by weeks of poor nutrition and stress. The distinctive head crest that marked her species lay flat against her skull, a sure sign of deep emotional distress. "Please," the alien mother said in broken standard, her voice carrying the musical undertones typical of her species. "You are human, yes? I know humans are kind to children. My little ones, they have no home now. I have no home now. My mate. He died in the mines. Company say we must leave. No family left on homeworld. Please, will you help us?" Sarah felt her heart clench as she looked at the 3 young Zephyrians clinging to their mother's flowing robes. They were clearly malnourished, their normally iridescent scales appearing dull and brittle. The youngest couldn't be more than 5 by human standards, its large eyes wide with fear and confusion. The middle child, perhaps 7, kept one protective arm around its younger sibling, while the oldest, maybe 10, stood slightly apart with the forced bravery of a child trying to be strong for everyone else. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently, crouching down to appear less imposing to the children. "I am Lyra Veshnai," the mother replied, using the full formal address of her species. "These are my children. Kaylin is my oldest, then Roval, and little Zara Min." She gestured to each child in turn with different arms, the multi-limbed grace of her people evident even in her exhausted state. Sarah had heard rumors about the mining company's latest cost-cutting measures. When workers died in industrial accidents, their families were immediately evicted from company housing and had their work visas revoked. It was legal, technically, but morally reprehensible. Most species had some form of social safety net for such situations, but the Zephyrians came from a world where family units were large and extended, making individual family homelessness nearly unthinkable in their culture. "How long have you been living in the cargo bay?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from the makeshift bedding and the small pile of belongings. 18 days, Lyra Veshnai replied. "Security, they find us 3 times. Each time we hide in different place, but now nowhere left to hide. Ship leaves tomorrow for human space. I hear humans sometimes adopt children who need homes, even children not same species. Is this true?" The hope in the alien mother's voice was heartbreaking. Sarah knew that while human adoption of alien children wasn't unheard of, it was incredibly complicated. There were legal hurdles, biological considerations, cultural barriers, and a mountain of bureaucracy that could take years to navigate. But looking at these 3 frightened children and their desperate mother, Sarah couldn't bring herself to crush that hope with cold reality. "It's complicated," Sarah said carefully. "But let's start with getting you somewhere safe to stay while we figure this out. I have a small apartment in the residential section. It's not much, but it's better than sleeping in a cargo bay." Lyra Veshnai's head crest rose slightly, the first sign of hope Sarah had seen from her. "You would do this? But you do not know us. In my culture, this would create obligation bond, very serious commitment." "I'm a xenobiologist," Sarah explained, standing and offering her hand to the oldest child, Kay Lin, who regarded her with cautious curiosity. "I study different alien species. Part of my job is understanding how to help when biological or cultural differences create problems. Consider this professional interest." It was partially true, though Sarah knew her motivations went much deeper. She'd grown up in the foster care system herself, bouncing between homes until she was old enough to age out. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might actually want her. She saw that same expression now in 3 young alien faces, and every instinct she had as both a scientist and a human being told her she had to help. The journey to Sarah's apartment was tense. They used maintenance corridors to avoid the main thoroughfares where station security might spot them. The children stayed close to their mother, their bare feet making almost no sound on the metal deck plates. Sarah found herself marveling at their natural grace, despite their obvious exhaustion and fear. Once in her small but comfortable apartment, Sarah immediately began preparing food. Her kitchen was stocked with standard rations, but she also kept various specialty foods for her research subjects. She had some Zephyrian dietary supplements that she'd been using for a study on their unique digestive systems. "You can eat human food safely?" Sarah asked as she prepared a simple meal of vegetable soup and bread. "Yes, our species are compatible," Lyra Veshnai replied, settling her children on Sarah's small couch. "We need trace minerals that humans do not, but we can survive on your food for a long time. My husband, he worked with humans for 2 years. He learned much about your people." As the children ate their first real meal in days, Sarah studied them carefully. Zephyrians were generally peaceful, highly intelligent, and surprisingly adaptable. Their children developed quickly compared to humans, reaching mental maturity by age 15, though they lived much longer, potentially up to 200 years. They were also naturally empathic, able to sense emotional states in other beings, which made them excellent at reading social situations, but also vulnerable to emotional trauma. "Your husband," Sarah said gently as Lyra Veshnai watched her children eat with obvious relief. "What happened in the mines?" The Zephyrian woman's secondary arms wrapped around herself in a protective gesture. "Cave in on level 7. He was shift supervisor. Went back to make sure all workers escaped. Tunnel collapsed. They found him 3 days later. Company said was accident, but other workers tell me safety protocols were ignored to meet quotas. Happens many times in those mines." Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. The mining companies operating in this sector were notorious for putting profits over worker safety. Most civilized worlds had strict regulations preventing such practices, but out here in the frontier systems, enforcement was sporadic at best. "What about your home world? No family there who could help?" "My clan was exiled when I was young. Political troubles. My husband's family, they died in plague 10 years ago. We had each other, our children, but now—" She trailed off, her musical voice heavy with grief. Sarah watched as little Zara Min, the youngest child, finished eating and curled up against her mother's side, exhausted from the day's stress. The middle child, Roval, kept glancing at Sarah with curious eyes, while Kaylin sat silently, processing the situation with the grave maturity of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "In my culture," Lyra Veshnai continued quietly, "children without family become responsibility of the clan. But we have no clan now. On homeworld, orphans are cared for by the community. But here," she gestured helplessly, "here, we are just aliens. No community, no support. I try to find work, but without mate to watch children, very difficult. And work visa expires soon." Sarah found herself making calculations in her head. Her apartment was small, but could accommodate them temporarily. She had savings from her research work, enough to support a larger household for a while. Her position at the station gave her access to legal resources and connections throughout human space. It would be complicated, potentially career-changing, but not impossible. "Tell me about your children," Sarah said, settling into a chair across from the family. "What do they need? Not just food and shelter, but education, medical care, emotional support?" Lyra Veshnai's head crest rose again, sensing the deeper meaning behind the question. "You are considering something. I can feel your thoughts changing, becoming more determined. Your empathic abilities, Sarah said with a slight smile. I'd read about them but never experienced them directly. What else can you sense? You are lonely, like me, Lyra Veshnai said softly. You care for others but have no family of your own. You see something in us that calls to your heart. But you are also afraid. This would change your life completely. Sarah was startled by the accuracy of the assessment. She had thrown herself into her career after aging out of foster care, building a life focused entirely on her work and research. She had friends and colleagues, but no deep personal connections, no family of her own. The idea of suddenly becoming responsible for 3 alien children and their mother was both terrifying and oddly appealing. In human culture, Sarah said carefully, adoption means taking full responsibility for children as if they were your own biological offspring. It means providing for all their needs, protecting them, guiding their education and development, and loving them unconditionally. It's a permanent commitment, not temporary help. This is what I ask for, Lyra Veshnai replied, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her large eyes. Not just for my children to survive, but for them to have chance at good life, to learn and grow and become strong adults. I know I ask much, but I have nowhere else to turn. Sarah looked at the 3 children, now all asleep against their mother's warm body. Despite everything they'd been through, they still trusted completely in their mother's ability to keep them safe. That trust was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine, but Sarah found herself wanting to be worthy of it. There will be legal procedures, Sarah said finally. Paperwork, background checks, evaluations. The authorities will want to make sure this is really in the children's best interests. It could take months or even years to make it official. But you will try? The hope in Lyra Veshnai's voice was palpable. Sarah looked around her small apartment, already mentally rearranging furniture to accommodate her unexpected guests. Tomorrow she would need to contact the legal department, arrange for larger quarters, figure out dietary requirements and educational needs. Her quiet, orderly life was about to become incredibly complicated. But as she watched the peaceful expressions on 3 young alien faces, Sarah realized that some complications were worth embracing. Yes, she said quietly. I'll try. The next morning brought a cascade of problems that Sarah hadn't fully anticipated. Station security had noticed the unusual energy signatures from her apartment, 4 Zephyrian life signs, where there should have been only her human one. Before she'd even finished her first cup of coffee, there was an insistent chiming at her door. Dr. Chen, Security Chief Martinez said when she opened the door, his expression stern but not unkind. We need to talk about your guests. Behind him stood 2 junior officers, and Sarah could see them trying to peer into her apartment where Lyra Veshnai was helping her children with breakfast at Sarah's small table. The Zephyrian woman caught Sarah's eye, her empathic abilities clearly picking up on the tension in the room. They're refugees, Sarah said firmly, stepping partially outside to block the officer's view. The mother's husband died in an industrial accident, and the mining company evicted them. Dr. Chen, I understand your compassion, but harboring undocumented aliens is a serious violation of station regulations, Martinez replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely unsympathetic. These beings need to be processed through proper channels that will separate the children from their mother and potentially deport them to a world where they have no family or support? Sarah challenged. Chief, you have children yourself. What would you want someone to do in this situation? Martinez sighed heavily, glancing back at his officers. Give me a moment with Dr. Chen. Wait in the corridor. Once they were alone, his official demeanor softened slightly. Sarah, I know you mean well, but this situation is complicated. The mining company has already filed a report listing these individuals as trespassers. They want them removed from the station immediately. On what grounds? Sarah demanded. Their work visas don't expire for another week, and there's no law against being homeless on a space station. No, but there are laws about where you can sleep and live, Martinez replied. Look, I'll give you 24 hours to sort this out through legal channels. After that, I have to follow protocol. Sarah felt a surge of frustration, but she also recognized that Martinez was already bending rules by giving her even that much time. Thank you. I won't waste it. After the security team left, Sarah immediately contacted the station's legal affairs office. What she learned wasn't encouraging. Interspecies adoption laws were a tangled web of bureaucracy that varied wildly between different governmental systems. As a human citizen working in frontier space, Sarah had certain rights and protections, but extending those to non-human dependents was far more complicated. The process typically takes 18 to 36 months, explained legal advisor Thompson during their emergency consultation. There are psychological evaluations, cultural compatibility assessments, financial reviews, and extensive background checks, and that's assuming no one objects to the arrangement. Someone objects? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The Zephyrian Cultural Preservation Society has filed a formal complaint. They argue that removing Zephyrian children from their native culture constitutes a form of cultural genocide. They're demanding the family be repatriated to their homeworld immediately. Sarah felt her heart sink. She'd heard of the ZCPS. They were well-meaning but often rigid in their interpretation of what was best for their species. The fact that Lyra Veshnai had specifically sought out a human adoptive family would likely be irrelevant to them. What are our options? Sarah asked. Emergency guardianship, Thompson replied after consulting his notes. If you can demonstrate that the children are in immediate danger and that you're the most suitable temporary guardian available, I can fast-track a hearing. But it's only temporary, maybe 6 months, while the formal adoption process proceeds. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Sarah spent the rest of the morning gathering documentation and preparing her case while Lyra Veshnai worked with her children on basic standard language lessons. The Zephyrian woman had insisted on keeping the children occupied and productive even in their uncertain circumstances. You are worried? Kaylin observed in careful standard as Sarah reviewed legal documents at her dining table. The oldest child's empathic abilities were already quite developed. Yes, I am, Sarah admitted, seeing no point in trying to hide her emotions from beings who could sense them directly. There are people who think you should go back to your homeworld instead of staying here with me. But homeworld has no family for us, Val said, looking up from the drawing tablet Sarah had given them. Mama told us. We would be alone there, too. I know, Sarah said gently. I'm going to try to explain that to the people who make these decisions. Little Zaramin climbed onto the chair next to Sarah, her large eyes serious. You want to keep us? She asked in Zephyrian, which Sarah's translation software rendered in her earpiece. Very much, Sarah replied, switching to her limited Zephyrian vocabulary. You are good children. I want to help you grow strong and smart. The child's face brightened, and she wrapped her small arms around Sarah's arm in what she was learning was a Zephyrian gesture of affection and trust. The emergency hearing took place that afternoon in the station's legal chambers. Sarah had expected a formal courtroom setting, but instead found herself in a conference room facing a panel of 3 officials: legal advisor Thompson, station administrator Reeves, and a representative from the Zephyrian Cultural Preservation Society who had joined via hologram from their headquarters 3 systems away. Dr. Chen, Administrator Reeves began, please state your case for emergency guardianship. Sarah stood, her prepared notes forgotten as she looked at Lyra Veshnai and her children seated nearby. These children have already lost their father to an industrial accident that could have been prevented if proper safety protocols had been followed. Their mother has no family or support system on their homeworld due to political exile. They've been living in cargo bays for over 2 weeks, slowly starving because no one else was willing to help them. She gestured toward the family. Lyra Veshnai specifically sought out human assistance because she'd learned about our cultural values regarding child welfare. She's not trying to abandon her heritage. She's trying to save her children's lives. The ZCPS representative, an elderly Zephyrian male whose formal robes marked him as a high-ranking cultural official, spoke next. Dr. Chen, while your intentions are admirable, you cannot possibly understand the complex cultural needs of Zephyrian children. They require specific dietary supplements, social structures based on clan hierarchies, and education in traditional arts that are essential to their identity. Respectfully, Sarah replied, I am a xenobiologist with 8 years of experience studying Zephyrian culture and physiology. I have access to all necessary dietary supplements through my research, and I've already identified 3 other Zephyrian families on this station who could provide cultural education and social connections. This was partially a bluff. She'd only had time to identify 1 other Zephyrian family, but she was confident she could find more. Furthermore, she continued, the children themselves should have some say in this decision. They're old enough to understand what's happening and express their preferences. Administrator Reeves nodded thoughtfully. That's a valid point. Kaylin, you're the oldest. Do you understand what's being discussed here? The 10-year-old Zephyrian stood with remarkable composure for someone so young. Yes, Administrator. Some people think we should go back to our homeworld, but we have no clan there. We would be given to strangers who might not care for us well. Dr. Sarah wants to become our human family and keep us safe. And what do you want? Reeves asked gently. I want my brother and sister to have good lives, Kaylin replied. I want them to learn and grow strong. I want Mama to not cry when she thinks we're asleep. Dr. Sarah makes Mama feel hope again. I can sense it. Roval stood next, their voice stronger than their 7 years should have allowed. I want to learn about human schools and make human friends, but also learn Zephyrian songs from Mama. Dr. Sarah says I can have both. Little Zara Min simply walked over to Sarah and took her hand, the gesture speaking louder than any words could. The ZCPS representative's head crest flattened in obvious frustration. Children cannot fully understand the long-term implications of such decisions. They are responding to immediate comfort and safety, not considering their future cultural identity. With respect, honored elder, Lyra Veshnai said, standing and using the formal address her culture required, I am their mother. I have spent many sleepless nights considering their future. On our homeworld, they would be raised by the state in facilities that are overcrowded and underfunded. They would receive basic education, but little individual attention or love. Her voice gained strength as she continued. Here, with Dr. Sarah, they can learn human ways while I teach them our traditions. They can grow up knowing they are wanted and cherished, not just tolerated. Is this not what any parent would choose for their children? The panel deliberated for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, Administrator Reeves spoke. Emergency guardianship is granted to Dr. Sarah Chen for a period of 6 months, renewable pending the outcome of formal adoption proceedings. During this time, Dr. Chen will have full responsibility for the welfare and education of the 3 minor children. Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense, it was almost overwhelming. It wasn't permanent, but it was a start. However, Reeves continued, there are conditions. Monthly welfare checks by station social services, regular cultural education sessions with approved Zephyrian instructors, and continued cooperation with the ZCPS regarding the children's cultural development. I agree to all conditions, Sarah said immediately. As they left the legal chambers, Lyra Veshnai took Sarah's hand in two of her own, a gesture of deep gratitude in her culture. "You have given my children something I could not," she said quietly. "A future with choices." But even as they celebrated this small victory, Sarah knew the real challenges were just beginning. That evening, as she helped the children settle into sleeping arrangements in her small living area, she realized how much her life was about to change. "Dr. Sarah," Kaylin said as she tucked the younger children into their makeshift beds, "will you really teach us human ways while Mama teaches us Zephyrian ones?" "That's exactly what we'll do," Sarah promised. "You'll learn the best of both cultures. You'll know how to navigate human society when you need to, but you'll never forget who you are or where you came from." As she watched the children settle into sleep, Sarah began planning their new life together. Tomorrow, she would need to arrange for larger living quarters, enroll them in the station's educational programs, and begin the complex process of building a truly multi-species family. It wouldn't be easy, but as she looked at three peaceful young faces and their mother's expression of cautious hope, Sarah knew she was exactly where she needed to be. 4 months into their new life together, Sarah stood in the observation deck of their expanded quarters, watching Kaylin help her younger siblings with their homework. The scene had become comfortably routine, yet it still filled her with wonder. The cramped, single apartment had been replaced with a family unit that gave everyone space to breathe and grow. "Val, remember what Mama taught us about the harmonic sequences," Kaylin was saying in Standard, patiently guiding their sibling through a traditional Zephyrian mathematics lesson that incorporated musical theory. "Each number has a song, and when you find the pattern, you can hear the solution." Sarah smiled as she watched Val's face light up with understanding. The 7-year-old had struggled initially with adapting to human educational methods, but combining traditional Zephyrian learning techniques with standard curriculum had proved remarkably effective. All three children were not only catching up to their grade levels, but excelling beyond them. "Dr. Sarah," Zaramin called out, abandoning her own studies to run over with a drawing tablet in hand. "Look, I drew our family." The picture showed 5 figures holding hands: a tall human woman with dark hair, a majestic blue-scaled Zephyrian adult, and 3 smaller Zephyrian children. They were standing in front of what was clearly meant to be their quarters, with a banner overhead that read, "Chen Vesh Family," in both standard and Zephyrian script. "Chen Vesh?" Sarah asked, touched by the detail. "Mama explained how human families share names," the 8-year-old said proudly. "She said we could combine yours with ours to show we belong together. Do you like it?" "I love it," Sarah said honestly, feeling the familiar warmth that came with these moments of acceptance and belonging. The integration hadn't been without its challenges. 2 months earlier, there had been a crisis when Val had fallen ill with what initially appeared to be a severe allergic reaction. The station's medical bay had no experience treating Zephyrian children, and for terrifying hours, Sarah had feared she might lose her middle child to something as simple as incompatible environmental filters. It had been Lyra Veshnai who saved the day, recognizing the symptoms as a stress-induced condition common in young Zephyrians who were adjusting to new environments. The solution required specific pheromone therapy that could only be provided by adult members of their species. Within hours, not only had Lyra Veshnai volunteered her own biological resources to help her child, but 3 other Zephyrian adults on the station had also offered assistance. That crisis had been a turning point. Sarah realized that she couldn't raise these children in isolation from their own species, and more importantly, that the Zephyrian community on the station had begun to accept her as a legitimate guardian worthy of their support. "Sarah," Lyra Veshnai's voice drew her back to the present. The Zephyrian woman had taken a job in the station's hydroponics bay, work that utilized her natural affinity for growing things while allowing her schedule flexibility for the children. The school coordinator contacted me today. They want to discuss Kaylin's advancement to accelerated programs. Sarah wasn't surprised. The oldest child had been devouring educational materials at an incredible pace, particularly anything related to xenobiology and cultural studies. Last week, Kaylin had submitted a research paper comparing human and Zephyrian child development that had impressed even Sarah's colleagues. "What does Kaylin think about it?" Sarah asked. "I want to do it," came the reply from across the room, where the 10-year-old had obviously been listening. "But only if I can still help teach my brother and sister. Family is more important than school advancement." The wisdom in that statement, coming from someone so young, never ceased to amaze Sarah. The children had learned to balance their individual growth with their commitment to each other in ways that many adult humans struggled with. A chime at their door announced a visitor, and Sarah opened it to find legal advisor Thompson with a broad smile and a thick folder of documents. "Congratulations, Dr. Chen," he said, stepping into their living space. "The formal adoption petition has been approved by all relevant authorities. As of today, you are the legal guardian of 3 children, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. The past 4 months had been filled with evaluations, interviews, home visits, and countless forms. There had been moments when she'd feared that some bureaucratic detail would tear their new family apart. "The ZCPS withdrew their objection?" she asked. "Not only withdrew it, but formally endorsed the arrangement," Thompson replied with obvious satisfaction. "It seems your approach of maintaining cultural connections while providing human social advantages has impressed them. They're actually considering your family as a model for future interspecies adoption cases." Lyra Veshnai's head crest rose in the expression of joy that Sarah had learned to recognize and treasure. "We are truly family now? No more temporary arrangements?" "Your family," Thompson confirmed. "The documentation is all here, including citizenship pathways for all of you if you choose to pursue them." As Thompson left, Sarah found herself surrounded by her children, all of them talking excitedly about what this meant for their future. She caught Lyra Veshnai's eye over their heads and saw the same overwhelming gratitude she felt herself. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Lyra Veshnai sat in their small kitchen sharing tea and reflecting on their journey. "When I first asked for your help," Lyra Veshnai said quietly, "I thought only of my children's survival. I did not expect to gain a sister." Sarah smiled at the Zephyrian term, which implied a relationship deeper than friendship but different from biological family. "I thought I was rescuing you. I didn't realize you were rescuing me too." "You were lonely as I was," Lyra Veshnai observed with her species' natural empathy. "We needed each other." It was true. Sarah's life before had been professionally fulfilling, but personally empty. She'd thrown herself into her research and career to avoid dealing with the lingering effects of growing up without a stable family. Now she woke each morning to the sound of children's voices, spent her evenings helping with homework and listening to stories, and fell asleep knowing that 4 other beings depended on her and loved her unconditionally. "The children want to visit Earth," she said, changing the subject to lighter matters. "Kaylin has been reading about human universities, and Ro Val wants to see an ocean." "And what does little Zara Min want to see?" Lyra Veshnai asked with amusement. "Ice cream shops," Sarah replied with a laugh. "Specifically, she wants to try every flavor of ice cream that exists on Earth." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the soft hum of the station's life support systems and the even softer sounds of sleeping children. "Sarah," Lyra Veshnai said eventually, "my people have a saying. The heart that opens to strangers finds that they were family all along. I think your species understands this wisdom too. Sarah nodded, thinking about all the ways humans had distinguished themselves throughout the galaxy. They weren't the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most advanced technologically, but they had an unusual capacity for forming bonds across species lines, for extending the concept of family beyond biological boundaries. We do, she agreed. Sometimes it gets us into trouble, but mostly it makes us better than we would be alone. The next morning brought new routines and new possibilities. Kaylin was accepted into the accelerated program, but chose a schedule that still allowed time to help with their siblings. Roval started taking art classes, where their natural Zephyrian sense of color and harmony produced works that amazed human instructors. Zaramin joined the station's youth choir, where her species' musical abilities made her a standout performer. Sarah found her own work evolving as well. Her research into interspecies family dynamics was breaking new ground, with data from her own household providing unique insights into how different species could successfully integrate. She'd been invited to present her findings at the Galactic Anthropological Conference, with her family planning to attend as living examples of her research. But perhaps the most significant change came 6 months later, when another desperate family appeared in the station's lower cargo areas. This time it was a human father with 2 young children, refugees from a corporate war that had devastated their colony world. Dr. Chen, Security Chief Martinez contacted her. We have a situation that might interest you. A human family in need of emergency assistance. The father specifically asked if there was someone on the station who understood what it was like to start over with children who had lost everything. Sarah looked around their quarters, now filled with the comfortable chaos of a thriving multi-species household. Kaylin was teaching Zara Min to play a traditional Zephyrian board game while Roval practiced musical scales on their instrument. Lyra Veshnai was preparing dinner, humming a song that blended melodies from both their cultures. Tell him there's a family here that knows exactly what that feels like, Sarah replied, and that there's always room for one more. As she prepared to meet another family in crisis, Sarah reflected on how much her understanding of family had expanded. It wasn't about species or biology or even legal documents. It was about choosing to love unconditionally, to protect fiercely, and to create a space where everyone could grow into their best selves. The Chenvesh family was about to grow again, and Sarah couldn't wait to see what new adventures awaited them all. When the human father and his children arrived at their door that evening, they found themselves welcomed not just by Sarah, but by the whole family. Lyra Veshnai offered food and comfort with the same grace she'd been shown months earlier. The children immediately began including the newcomers in their activities, understanding instinctively that home was something you shared, not something you hoarded. Is this what humans call paying it forward? Kaylin asked Sarah as they watched the newest refugees settle into their guest room. Yes, Sarah replied, putting her arm around the child who had become her daughter in every way that mattered. It's what families do for each other, no matter what species they are. Outside their windows, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by the small dramas of individual lives. But inside their quarters, something profound had shifted in the galaxy's understanding of what was possible when different species chose to see each other not as aliens, but as family.